Most men past 80 get up 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a night to use the bathroom. That's not an insult. That's what the numbers actually show when researchers study men our age. So if you're one of the rare few who sleeps straight through, you should know that's not luck. There's usually a reason, and for years I didn't know what mine was. I'm 83. I used to keep a pair of slippers pointed toward the bathroom door like a soldier keeping his boots ready for an alarm. 3 times a night, sometimes 4, I'd shuffle down that hallway in the dark, one hand on the wall, waiting for my eyes to adjust. In the next few minutes, I'll tell you what actually changed that for me, and it wasn't a pill, and it wasn't something I expected at all. These days, I sleep from 10 at night until my alarm goes off at 6, most nights without getting up even once. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because for a long stretch of my 80s, I assumed that broken sleep was simply the toll of being an old man, and I was wrong about that assumption. It didn't happen all at once. It built slowly, the way most things do after 75. First, it was 1 trip a night, easy enough to shrug off. Then it became 2, then 3, and by the time I turned 81, I was waking up so often that I stopped remembering what a full night of unbroken sleep even felt like. My wife used to sleep through most of it, until the 4th or 5th year, when even she started stirring every time I creaked down that hallway. I quietly rearranged my whole life around it without ever quite admitting that's what I was doing. I stopped drinking coffee after 10 in the morning. I turned down invitations to evening card games because I didn't want to be the man excusing himself from the table every 40 minutes. I started sitting on the aisle at church, near the back, close to the door, just in case. Nobody ever asked why. I never explained. I just quietly built my whole day around bathroom logistics, the way a lot of men my age do without ever calling it what it is. At my regular checkups, I'd mention it the way most men mention these things, sideways, almost as an afterthought. Still getting up a fair bit at night, I'd say, and take the general nod I got back as the whole answer. Nobody ever asked me what I weighed compared to what I weighed at 60. Nobody connected those two numbers for me, and for years, neither did I. What changed things was a conversation with an old friend of mine, a retired urologist I've known since our sons played baseball together decades ago. I finally sat him down and asked directly, why does this keep getting worse when I'm not exactly living recklessly? I expected him to talk about the prostate itself, the way every doctor before him had. Instead, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. He asked how much I weighed now compared to my early 60s. I told him about 18 pounds heavier, most of it settled right around my middle, the way it does for a lot of men once the metabolism slows and the daily walking stops being automatic. He nodded like I'd just confirmed something he already suspected. He explained that carrying extra weight, especially around the belly, does more than just add pounds. It changes pressure inside the pelvis, it increases inflammation throughout the body, and it disrupts the normal signals that tell your bladder it's full versus nearly full. For a lot of men, he said, that extra weight is quietly working against a comfortable night's sleep in ways that have nothing to do with how much water you drank at dinner. Here's what really stopped me. He told me about research following men with excess weight and prostate discomfort, where losing even a modest amount, not a dramatic transformation, just 5 to 10% of body weight, led to a real, measurable easing of urinary symptoms, including the nighttime trips that had been wrecking my sleep for years. Not a total cure, not a promise, but a real, documented shift for a lot of the men in that research, from carrying a weight that wasn't dramatic at all. I sat with that for a long time after he said it. 18 pounds. Not 50, not 100. 18 pounds I'd slowly put on over 2 decades of smaller portions of exercise and larger portions of dinner, and it had apparently been quietly working against my sleep the whole time, hiding in plain sight behind what I'd always assumed was just an old man's prostate doing what old prostates do. I thought back over those 2 decades, and I could actually trace it once I looked. Retirement at 62, when the daily walk to and from the plant disappeared overnight and nothing replaced it. My wife's knee surgery a few years later, which meant fewer walks together in the evening, the kind we used to take just to talk about the day. A hip that started aching in my late 60s and made me favor the recliner over the yard work I used to do without thinking twice. None of those 18 pounds arrived all at once, dramatic and obvious. They arrived a pound or 2 a year, quiet as anything. the kind of gradual change you don't notice in the mirror because you see yourself every single day. What struck me hardest was realizing how many other things I'd blamed instead. I'd blamed the coffee I drank in the afternoon. I'd blamed the extra glass of water at dinner because a nurse once told me hydration mattered for my heart. I'd blamed stress, blamed my age, blamed genetics, blamed just about everything except the 18 pounds sitting quietly around my middle the whole time, doing exactly what my friend described, pressing down, feeding low-grade inflammation, keeping my bladder a little more irritable than it needed to be. He put it to me in plain terms, the kind I could actually picture. Extra weight around the middle, he said, acts almost like a second layer pressing down on everything below it, bladder included, and it feeds a low simmer of inflammation throughout the body that keeps tissues a little more irritable, a little quicker to signal, empty me, even when there isn't much to empty. Losing even a modest amount of that weight takes some of that pressure and some of that irritability away. It's not about looking different in the mirror. It's about giving your bladder and your prostate a little more room to behave normally again. For years, one number ran my life, the PSA. It would tick up a point and I'd lie awake the whole night, certain it meant the worst, picturing the biopsy, the knife, the end of everything. Then someone finally told me the truth no doctor had. That number doesn't measure cancer. It measures your prostate. And as we age, it climbs mostly because the gland is simply enlarging, benign, swollen, and uncomfortable, not the worst. The number was scaring me half to death over something ordinary. And the prescriptions they push to shrink it? They can flatten your drive completely, soften everything, quietly take the man right out of you. I wasn't willing to trade that away. There's a gentle way to support that gland, keep it comfortable, a healthy size, without surrendering any of that. Keep getting checked every year, of course. At 83, that number doesn't own me anymore. I finally have peace. Let me show you what gave it to me in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. So here's what I actually did, once I understood the weight connection. I didn't go on some crash diet at 83. That would have been foolish, and dangerous besides. I made 3 modest changes and gave them real time to work. I cut my portions down by roughly a quarter, not by starving myself, just by using a smaller plate and stopping when I felt satisfied instead of stuffed. I started walking 20 minutes most mornings, slow and steady, nothing that would strain my knees. And I swapped my evening habit of a bowl of ice cream in front of the television for a piece of fruit most nights, saving the ice cream for Sundays only. The mechanism behind each piece made sense once it was laid out for me. Smaller, more sensible portions reduce the steady load of inflammation your body has to manage day after day. Regular walking helps the body use the food you eat instead of storing it around your middle, and it improves circulation to the pelvis, which matters more than most men realize. And cutting back on sugar in the evening specifically avoids the blood sugar swings that tend to keep you more alert, more easily woken, right in the hours you're trying to sleep through. None of these 3 things alone would have moved much. It was carrying all 3 together, steadily for a couple of months, that actually shifted how my nights felt. I won't pretend it was effortless. The first few weeks I missed my nightly ice cream more than I expected to admit to a grown man. My daughter laughed at me the first time I turned down dessert at Sunday dinner and asked for a second helping the following week to make up for it. We still joke about that. The mornings were easier. 20 minutes around the block became something I looked forward to, especially once the neighbor's dog started waiting by the fence for me, tail going like he had an appointment with me every morning at 7. By the 5th week, I noticed I was down about 6 pounds, and the nighttime trips had dropped from 3 most nights to 1, sometimes none at all. By the 10th week, I'd lost close to 11 pounds total, and full nights of sleep had become the normal thing rather than the rare exception. I kept a small notebook by the bed, just a tally mark each time I got up, mostly so I wouldn't convince myself of progress that wasn't really there. Looking back through those pages is what finally proved to me this wasn't wishful thinking on my part. Last month I drove myself 6 hours to visit my brother, stopping only twice the whole trip, and for the first time in years I didn't spend the drive mentally mapping out every gas station bathroom along the interstate. My brother noticed before I even mentioned it and asked what on earth I'd done differently. I think often about a man named Rufus who wrote to me after an earlier video, 78 years old, a retired mail carrier who told me he'd taken to sleeping in a recliner in the living room because getting up from a proper bed so many times a night had become its own small ordeal for his hips. He'd assumed, the way I had, that this was simply the fate of getting old. When he heard about the connection between modest weight loss and nighttime urination, he told me it was the first thing anyone had explained to him that actually made sense of his own situation, because he could look back and pinpoint almost exactly when his weight had crept up, the 2 years after his knee surgery, when walking became hard and comfort food became easy. Rufus started small, the way I had. He gave up his afternoon soda first, nothing else, just that one habit. Within a month, he'd added short walks once his knee felt strong enough, 10 minutes at a time, twice a day. He told me the shift wasn't sudden or dramatic. It crept in slowly, one fewer bathroom trip every couple of weeks, until one morning he realized he'd slept in his actual bed for 6 nights straight without once thinking about it. He told me about the night it really landed for him. His granddaughter had come to stay for a weekend, sleeping in the next room, and he'd worried the whole first night about waking her every time he got up. That second night, he didn't get up at all. He said he lay there the next morning almost in disbelief, listening to her still asleep down the hall, thinking about how many years he'd quietly organized his whole life around a body that woke him constantly, and how it hadn't needed to be that way the entire time. He also told me something that stuck with me for weeks afterward. He said the hardest part wasn't the walking or even giving up the afternoon soda. It was admitting to himself that something he'd assumed was permanent, something he'd built his whole daily routine around for the better part of a decade, had actually been within his own control the entire time. He said it made him a little angry at first, wondering how many good nights of sleep he'd lost simply because nobody had ever connected those 2 dots for him. But mostly, he said, it made him grateful he'd finally heard it before too many more years slipped by. If you're on medication for your prostate, your heart, your blood pressure, or anything else, please hear this clearly. None of what I've shared replaces your treatment, and you should never change a medication without talking to your doctor first. And please, keep up with your regular prostate checkups without fail. Understanding this weight connection doesn't replace those visits. It just gives you something real and manageable to work on between them. What I want you to walk away with is this. Those nighttime trips to the bathroom you've come to accept as simply part of being over 80 might be tangled up with something as ordinary and as correctable as a modest amount of extra weight you've been carrying for years without giving it much thought. I'm not telling you to obsess over a scale. I'm telling you there's a real, gentle lever here, one that doesn't require anything drastic, and one that's actually within your reach. Here's what I settled on. A few drops a day. And let me tell you why it works. One compound calms one signal, but a swollen prostate answers when several are calmed at once. The growth signal, the inflammation, the pressure inside it. So what I use concentrates them, working as one, the way the research actually uses them, not a single ingredient pretending to be enough. A gland that stays comfortable and a healthy size, fewer trips, and the quiet of no longer fearing that number. It leaves the man fully intact, none of that flattening the prescriptions can do. It's linked right under this video, go look for yourself. It won't replace your doctor or your yearly check. It supports the biology right alongside them. I'm 83, and that number doesn't own me anymore. I think about the man I was, standing in a dark hallway 3 or 4 times a night, treating exhaustion as the price of admission for growing old. And I think about the man I am now, who sleeps through most nights, and wakes up actually rested, not because of some miracle, but because I finally understood what my own body had been quietly asking me to change. That's the real difference, not magic, just paying attention to the right thing for once. If broken sleep like this has become part of your normal too, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one myself. And if this kind of honest, straightforward explanation is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this coming every week.